We are recording. Welcome back, everybody, to Stop Interviewing, Start Selling. I'm your host, Philip Meyer, and today I have a very special guest on my show. Actually, some would say a blast from the past. This is First Lieutenant Matthew Rainwater. Matt, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. I appreciate it. It's been a long time.
Yeah, it certainly has. Thanks for having me on, Philip.
Yeah, of course. So we know each other going back to, what was it, third grade or is it fourth grade?
Third grade.
Third grade? Wow. And that was, I want to say that was, if memory serves correctly, that was Mrs. Underwood's class at Dudley Elementary, right?
Correct.
You know, the only reason I remember that is because I had a fat crush on Mrs. Underwood. Like, she was like the first woman I ever looked at and was like, oh, she's pretty.
Yeah, she was probably one of my favorite teachers there. And I know her and my mom kept in touch a little bit over the years.
Oh, okay. Are they still in touch now?
I don't think so, but I mean, they were keeping in touch for a lot longer than I would have guessed. So
Yeah, for sure. Um, so you went from Dudley, I think, because your family moved from Antelope to, I won't say where you guys moved to, but I remember going to one of your birthday parties. It was at the time for somebody so young, I was like, oh, he lives super far away. And then from there, you went to high school, obviously. Now you're in the Air Force currently. Did you join the Air Force fresh out of high school?
yes. So yeah, I left California in sixth grade, like in the middle of that year, and went to Massachusetts. And then from Massachusetts, stayed there until high school. And then after graduation, I worked a couple jobs until basically I waited for my position to open up, which was, what was it, from June. I waited until it was Valentine's Day when I like first stepped into basic training. So that was 2006.
Nice. Now, when you went to basic training, so tell me, actually, first of all, let's back up a little bit because like, I always tell people when they ask me if I've served in the military or because I have such a great respect for people who serve. And a lot of that comes from my dad who served in the Navy. And one thing that he would force my brother and I to do would be to walk up to a service member, especially if they're in uniform, shake their hand, make eye contact, and say, thank you so much for your service. And so when September, it wasn't September 11th, I think it was just right as I was graduating high school, I actually went to the recruiting office for the Marines. And I ended up not doing it for whatever reason. I thought I was going to run a martial arts school the rest of my life. But to this day, it is literally the one thing in my life I regret not doing is serving in the military. So, number one, thank you so much for your service. Like, I greatly appreciate that. But number two, what was it that made you want to enlist, and why the Air Force out of all the branches?
So I appreciate it. And, everybody serves in different ways, so how it all started for me was honestly, it always seemed like it was just something I was going to do. Even when, we first met at Dudley, it was just kind of something that I was like, this is what I'm going to do. When it comes to the Air Force, there's a little bit of family bias with that because both my mom and dad were in the Air Force. My family's always served in some capacity, but recently it was more Air Force oriented. I did have a grandfather in the Army and whatnot, but that was pretty much the push, because with, being at Dudley, we had McClellan Air Force Base right there, where my dad was stationed at. And so that was pretty huge on on that front. My dad was a recruiter, not to say that was like any influence at all from that realm, but just kind of growing up with that lifestyle, that was just something I kind of felt like I was going to do in some way, that continued through college or high school. So at a certain point, I didn't really apply myself like terribly. I did enjoy myself in high school a lot, but it was just something like I know I'm going to, this is something I want to do. And so I enlisted the first chance I could get. And then I waited for a position to open up.
Wow. Yeah, see, I didn't know that your dad served too. So that's pretty cool. So was it the Air Force out of everybody else because of your dad then?
So that was a part of it. And so he brought up a lot of things because I mean, I remember being a kid and whether it's on the playground or just in the hallways, you talk smack with like your peers and stuff like that. And, some people would say they were joining for, whatever reason. A lot of it was more fitness based and things like that. But what he brought to my decision-making process was like the type of benefits that the Air Force provides versus like some of the other branches. And the quality of life. So those are things that were important to me, whether it was at that time and now. And I would attest that that's mostly true. The Air Force does provide a really good quality of life. I'm not saying the other branches don't, it's just different. But that was a lot of it going into it. I remember, we'd have these pissing contests like with peers, like, the basic training's longer here or that. And to me, that didn't even really matter in the calculus with that decision.
Yeah, that was kind of my thought process about it too. Was one of the reasons I looked at the Marines is because literally I was walking around in a high school gymnasium. I think it was on like a career day, and there was this like super jacked, yoked dude, and I think literally a girl next to me that I liked said, "Wow, that guy's super hot." And I was like, "I'm gonna go talk to that guy and be like him because I want this girl, right?" And
Yeah.
when I went up and asked him, like, what does he do? Like, what was this all about? One of the things that he said to me was, yeah, don't worry about it because I don't think you're the right fit. And immediately, like, my prideful instinct went, I want to show you. Let me jump up on that pull-up bar and show you how many pull-ups I can do. And then eventually it led to me going and taking the ASVAB. Like, I got all the way to the final stages of signing right before boot camp. And then I talked to my martial arts instructor at the time, who was like my second dad. And he was like, look, don't go, like, you have a career already. But to your point, looking back at it, some of the things that I even tell young people that talk to me and stuff, and they ask about the military, is I go, do it, 100%, go do it. Because, I mean, you can make a career out of it. I mean, you go 20 years, I think is it 20 years or 25 years before you could retire?
So it's currently 20 years. Now a couple of years ago, they rolled out a new retirement system, but it's essentially the same. You do 20 years, you're going to get a pension. What that looks like, it just depends on when you came in. But for me, I'm under an older system. It looks just like what my dad is getting when he came in. But essentially, yeah, you're right. 20 years, you're getting a pension. So honestly, for a lot of folks, it's a good decision, especially if they don't know what they want to be when they grow up, kind of deal. It's a good point of like, let me serve a couple years and things kind of flesh out, see life, see where life takes you, see what opportunities come up. But I mean, I've met so many people, I'm sure you have too, that whether despite the length of their military service, are probably in a better place than they were.
Yeah, like, and that's kind of what I think about with younger kids these days that don't know, is I tell them, look, even if you went 20 years in the military, by the time that you get done, let's say you enlist at 18 years old, you go to basic, you go to your it's not AIT, right? Something else after basic.
I forget what the Army calls it. That sounds right. But basically, yeah, it's a secondary training. But essentially, how the Air Force works is you have basic training. So if you enlist, you do basic training. You go into what's called technical training, which would be probably an AIT style. But essentially, it's that second portion of training. That for most career fields. However, if you're in medical, there's like a little bit of different rules that they play because they have like different phases and whatnot, and it's a lot longer. But essentially, that's it. But yeah, you have your basic training, you break everybody down the same, they all amount the same in a sense, and then they go off to their respective careers that they signed up for, and then they get there. And so some of them are, 6 weeks long, some of them are 6 months, a year long. It just depends on what they're signed up to do. And then after there, they'll go and, to their first duty assignment and start their life. So
Yeah. So, I mean, let's say you enlist at 18, you go 20 years. That means you're going to be, 38 years old with a pension, with benefits. You've done something that only a handful of the population actually ever gets to do. You've probably seen, by the time your time is done in 20 years, I mean, you've probably seen at least 4 to 5 different stations, different countries, probably in different parts of the world, right? I mean, like how many different stations have you had since you've joined?
yeah. So yeah, you're right. I mean, experiences can vary, for sure. Case, because when I was enlisted, I actually cumulatively was at one duty location for about 10 years, but within that duty station, I was in different jobs, which that's pretty normal. But I had a family matter that actually brought me back to that first duty assignment. So it essentially like helped accumulate all those years. If that didn't happen, I probably would have gone off to do, another assignment that was vastly different than what I was doing before. But yeah, I mean, with work trips, deployments, and things like that, absolutely, seen a number of countries and seen different places. And so, it's exciting. Some of them, better than others, but absolutely, yeah. If you're in for that long, you're going to see, all kinds of action in that sense.
Yeah. See, and that's the thing I think people lose sight of, is that part of it. Especially like once they get out, let's say you learned a skill. Like a buddy of mine, he went into Air Force as I want to say he was a security forces specialist, which is like the Air Force version of military police, right? And he went from that to serving, and then he went straight into that to being a cop with the Highway Patrol in California. And I mean, he makes really good money doing that. And the cool part is he still got the GI Bill. So if he wanted to go back and go get his bachelor's degree and get like I think CHP has like a 5% or 10% incentive pay if you have a 4-year degree. But point is that by targeting that career path and by having that experience, he set himself up for literally the rest of his life, right? Now, of course, you have other stories. I'm sure that you've probably been part of this, where you've seen people have PTSD and they have a dishonorable discharge or they do crazy stuff. And then obviously you can go the opposite way too, because would you say that the military is for everyone? Everybody should enlist?
Absolutely. So actually, security forces, that was actually the original route I was going to go before joining. Because yeah, I was going to do the 4-year plan and then get out and then go Massachusetts State Police, or at least, try out for that. And then I don't know, I had some, being a high schooler, my mind changed all the time. So I remember one weekend or 1 week, I just was like, I don't think I want to do that anymore. So I switched my career field to an intelligence discipline. Recruiter wasn't happy about it, but he made it happen, and ultimately got that. But no, security forces, that's a really good career path. I know a lot of folks, I mean, yeah, they're sitting at gates or sitting on the flight line and stuff like that, but
Matt, are you there?
see is like you just that can then roll into an associate's, and then you can, then of course yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you. You froze there for a second.
Hello?
But can you hear me? Are we good?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, cool.
Where did it cut off?
So you were saying that some people sit on the flight line or like at gates.
Yeah, and so, but I guess what you don't see, or right away, is with their training they initially got, they get college credits towards a degree in that specialty. So in that case, it would be like a criminal justice they can then roll that into an associate's, which then can roll into a bachelor's. But it, it helps set them up for, if they do decide to leave early, they have something, that they earned from, military service, and can transfer that easily over to, state police, local police, any other type of agency that they're interested in and qualified for.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, I went to the, like, I was actually in the CHP Academy back in 2010, and the majority of my classmates were all ex-military. In fact, all the company commanders got placed in, like, obviously a leadership role. Like my company commander, shout out to Mike Melton, was actually he was a Marine for quite some time. He was also a CrossFit instructor. So PT to him was super easy, where it was harder to maybe somebody of my build. But yeah, like I noticed there was a huge difference in how they learned March, and they already knew that stuff. And so I feel like going from military to going into law enforcement, even though today it's not as popular as it used to be, for various reasons, it seems like a pretty natural transition to go. So you chose to stay in the military instead of going to Massachusetts State Police, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, basically once I set my path on like the intelligence career field, that pretty much stopped like that career path. So, yeah. So once I, went in, I just kind of acted like a sponge and tried to absorb everything. Cause like that was obviously new to me. No one like goes into that straight out of high school with any experience. So you're just kind of bewildered by like everything you're learning. You're in a new location, you're meeting new people, you're just doing a very different thing. Like for me, I mean, I spent 8 months, cooking, washing dishes, serving people. And now I'm like in a classroom setting, learning about things that like I didn't think I would be learning about. So it was not necessarily a culture shock, but it was just something I really felt like I need to pay attention, like if I'm going to be useful. So yeah, there's a lot of benefits tied to those jobs. So, and to go back to an earlier point, that was another thing that was of interest to me, was like, how is this going to set you up after military service? So a lot of the jobs within the Army and Marines and some of the in the Navy, yes, they appealed to me, but it was okay. But then what happens after? And so much of the jobs in the Air Force, it was easier for me to translate. Okay, I have these like different career paths I can go after service, whether it's 4 years, 6 years, or 20.
Yeah. And you brought up a really good point there, because I remember like I had a really good friend of mine who told me this. He literally told me 2 words that changed my entire outlook on number one, chasing a career, but then working at that career, and then promotion as well, right? And that was simply, I was sitting down with him for lunch one day, and he was like, so what are your goals? And he was probably in his 30s. I think I was in my early 20s when we were talking about this. And I said, well, I'm running a Taekwondo school. I feel like I'm gonna make a lot of money because I'm gonna open up a whole bunch of different schools and have a chain or whatever. And he goes, okay, what next? And that was literally all he said was, what next? And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, well, what's the next step? What are you going to do to get there? And I realized very quickly, I have no clue how to do that. It's just a pipe dream, right? There needs to be actual steps. And so when you're talking about that's extremely valuable, I think, for people to hear, whether they're young or they're old, because I think so many times people get stuck in a rut, right? They get stuck in their job and they go, I'm just going to sit here because I'm comfortable. And they don't look at what's coming next. What are they going to do after this, right? Because it can't last forever. Yeah, I mean, it's a great point.
And
sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say there's some, and so you talk about comfort, and that can be, it can be because in certain ways, especially for someone who is like, whether they need to grow or should be growing, they have discomfort to grow professionally, personally, and whatnot. So, for the military, like, you don't really get to choose where you go or what you do. But I would argue that's probably the same at any job. Like maybe you get to choose the location, you know, based on where you're living at, whatnot. But really, like what you're doing to stay employed and whatnot, you're going to be put in very uncomfortable, situations or positions. But in a sense, they're designed for you to grow. You know, you learn from them, you grow from it to become better. You know, so whether promotion's your goal, to move to another location's a goal. It really doesn't matter. But you have to have that pressure, that discomfort to do it. When you're comfortable, that should be a red flag of like, okay, what's going on and what can I be doing to better myself?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually had a conversation, the first podcast I did with Ben Baker. He was or he still is a UPS package division manager. I asked him, when you look at promoting, do you look at the responsibility and just go, that's too much responsibility. I don't ever want to deal with that. That terrifies me. So I'll pose the same question to you. Being a first lieutenant, I would imagine you're probably overseeing airmen, right? So how many airmen do you oversee, and is that intimidating to you to have to manage those people and to have to lead those people?
So actually, so right now, no. So so I'm an older lieutenant. So basically, how that came to be, I commissioned pretty late in the game. Like when everything was all said and done, I commissioned when I was about at my 13-year mark, or no, 12 or 13-year mark. So I was kind of over the hill anyways in terms of like on my way to retirement. But
Yeah, I mean, you look
before that,
super old.
yeah, right. So before that, in my enlisted job, my last enlisted job, I was overseeing 80 airmen, civilians, and contractors. And then at officer training school, even though the stakes were pretty low, I mean, for the last 3 weeks, I was in charge of the like 250 cadets. Basically, I just had to make sure they were like staying out of trouble and not doing anything to jeopardize their commission. But yeah, so there's scopes of responsibility. They're fluctuating right now. I'm kind of on easy street in that regard because my team size has dwindled. But I like it because I'm able to like really get involved like individually with people where, those large swaths of like folks, it's hard to like, especially in like, say for that example, like that 3 weeks, that's 3 weeks to get to know 250 people. Probably not going to happen. I can get to so many people, as many as I can, but at the end of the day, we're all there for one goal, to commission. Now I'm able to like really focus on people, take care of their needs and stuff like that, so they can take care of the mission. So to answer that question shortly, right now it's pretty easy and I like it, but that is expected to go up as time moves on. My position changes.
Gotcha. So when you say the word commission, the spine and the back of my neck get this thrill that goes through it, because obviously I'm a sales guy, right? So commission to me probably means totally something completely different than what you're talking about, right? What does commission mean in the Air Force or the military?
Yeah. So, I mean, in some ways it probably means, money, right? More money. So maybe they're similar in that way, but yeah, commissioning in the military sense is basically, currently it's just anybody with a 4-year degree, being sworn into basically an office within their service branch. So that's all that means. And so now they have certain rules and regulations that they're able to not only do they have to follow, but they will execute and oversee and hold over enlisted members under their charge.
Gotcha. So it's more of a position, right?
It is probably like more so in a legal sense. So there's certain things that like officers are legally allowed to do or handle that enlisted members cannot. But that just also means you're held accountable much differently than an enlisted member would be. So that would be true for any like, I don't know. I mean, whether it was like a silly like infraction or driving under the influence. I mean, that's pretty common. However, like if an enlisted person did it versus an officer, the punishments are going to be different because the expectations are held, or they're just held to those different standards. So we also, not only do we fall under like, civil laws and whatnot, but we also have the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So that's an entirely different playbook that can get thrown at any military member, for a variety of reasons. But yeah, so there's a little bit of different accountability, but essentially like you're responsible for more, but you're on the hook for more, and there's lower tolerance for failure in that regard versus an enlisted member.
Yeah. Wow. And that's something I've heard before, but never to that degree. That enlisted, obviously, I mean, it makes sense that like enlisted versus an officer might be different standards. So because you've been in for how long now? Has it been 20 years?
I'm gonna hit 15 in February.
15. Okay. So in 15 years, I mean, are you re-enlisting at 4 years at a time, or are you just telling them, hey, this is just what I want to do until retirement, just keep me, I'm good?
So for enlisted, so that would be true if I was still enlisted. And actually they just changed it to where after a certain point, it's called an indefinite enlistment. So you're just on board until you choose to leave, or you time out, whether in rank or position, because you can't sit at a certain rank for like so long. You have to be progressing, or they're like, okay, you got to leave.
Really?
The higher up you go, I mean, just accumulating. Yeah. So the higher up you go, I mean, the longer you can stay in, but you can't sit at like an E4 for 20 years anymore, or E5. Like that used to be true a long time ago. Can't do that anymore. When you commission, it's indefinite. Like, so you just, once you're in, and you basically have to resign your commission.
Gotcha.
So you're basically resigning your office, and that would be it. But there's a couple stipulations with that. So doing certain things for both enlisted and officer incurs what's called an active duty service commitment. So basically that means, so when I commissioned and then went to technical training, I now owe the Air Force a minimum of 5 years. Like, so I owe them 5 years, but after that 5 years, I can leave whenever, as long as they'll have me. That's how that works. And that's true for enlisted during like certain milestones. They'll incur that kind of caveat on their career. So they have to do a certain amount of time before they can then do any type of action like that.
Gotcha. All right. So as far as family goes, because of course I see all these videos on Facebook and on YouTube of family members coming home and making the sacrifice to go on deployment for 6 months to a year, maybe even sometimes longer. They come home, obviously the kids come running up. Any little ones at home missing you when you're out there? Uh-oh.
I didn't catch that last part.
Oh no, I was just asking,
Yep.
any
I didn't catch that last part.
Oh, okay. Any little ones at home? Any kids in the family at this point?
Not right now, just 2 dogs, a wife, but yeah, kids soon. But yeah, I mean, and that was something too. Like, I mean, whether anyone's joining, enlisting or commissioning, like once you're in, like it's just amazing, like how you see different people at different stages in their life, like all at once. So for me, like coming out of high school, I'm no longer hanging out with high school like peers. It was like I'm hanging out and working with like families at different stages in their life. Some people on their first marriage, they have like a handful of kids. Maybe they're on their second marriage. Maybe they're at different milestones. So you get all this like experience, like just like witnessing that kind of stuff and how people react to those like adversities and challenges and things like that. So it's really interesting. Learned a lot just listening and watching, but yeah, so it's pretty wild, but it also helped, I think, maybe prepare me because, I may see things or hear things that's like, oh, that's something to watch out for, or I didn't know that. And then, uh, carry that forward and in relationships, and things like that.
Yeah. So I would imagine that's probably even more true now because I know that just a couple of years ago, the military actually raised its age max. I think it was from, I want to say it was from 25 to like 39 or something crazy like that. So with that being said, you probably see people that come in that are
Oh yeah.
they're much older than you
Oh yeah.
when you first started. They probably have families. They probably have a wife. In fact, it's funny because right after they did that, like I was actually struggling at the job I was at, and I actually said, you know what? I've always regretted not doing it. Maybe I'll go talk to a recruiter. And the recruiter was like, okay, cool. Well, we definitely want you to be at like 170 pounds. I was like, oh, close. Nope, not happening. I was like at the peak physical condition I was ever in. I think I was 175. I was fresh out of the CHP Academy, like 10% body fat. I was like, yeah, if I can't get there at that place, there's no chance. So I was like, no, I'm good. But so tell me about that because you probably see a lot more personalities with that new change, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I would say at every place I was in the military, like whether I was like just coming in basic training to technical training to my first duty assignment. Oh yeah. All walks of life. You had folks that went to school. I mean, there was like folks that had a master's, but they just couldn't find a job. So they had to do something, because they had a family. There's folks that were in the Guard. So that's another thing too. A lot of folks that I met, they were in the Guard, they were older, they're like in their 30s and whatnot, but they had to go through the training just like everybody else. But you meet everybody from all walks of life with different types of, challenges that they're facing at home, and they're trying to make a living out of it. But I remember when I was instructing down in Texas, I was staff sergeant at the time. I would have students that would have like way more educational like qualifications than I did on the topic I was teaching. It was pretty wild. It wasn't uncommon to have a few folks with master degrees roll through. Bachelor's was pretty common, and this was like an associate degree awarding course geared towards the post high school student. But the times hit everybody differently, and this was in 2012. 2013. So you just never know.
Yeah. So then as an instructor, because I've been in situations as a senior sales consultant where we get brand new sales reps on the team, but just because you're a brand new rep doesn't always mean that you're young. So I've actually helped train some people that have been in like their 40s or even their 50s. And for me, it's been a challenge because they look at me and they go, of course this guy's selling because he's young and he's energetic and he can probably go hit 30 or 40 doors a day and I'm not gonna be able to keep up with him, so I'm just gonna tune him out. How do you deal with that being an instructor and kind of seeing that relationship start up in the classroom or in your, is it company or is it a flight?
So yeah, in the Air Force it's a flight. So flight squadron. Yeah, we talk like that. We don't talk like everybody else. But as an instructor, so it would be true whether I was an instructor or like, when I was at my last enlisted position, like a flight chief, it's setting the ground rules and expectations early and kind of, reinforcing it. So a lot of times what I would tell folks, because in one could have old, turning 18 that weekend to a 50-year-old that's getting told they have to retrain or they're losing their job. I'd have a hodgepodge of folks in, but I would just tell them like, look, we're here for the, one purpose is, you're going to be graduating into this new job. And so the course was designed around the average student. And so the pace, there may be parts where like they find boring or they already know that stuff, and that's fine. But if you know something, contribute, help somebody else that doesn't know it. But be a team player, and, being proactive, whether it's in your own learning or somebody else's learning, is going to make this a lot more bearable, and a lot more rewarding, I think, for everybody. And I'll tell you, like, I learned a ton instructing, and I'm sure you can attest, like, you probably learned more teaching than you were like in class, like listen, trying to follow along with an instructor or coach, like whether that was martial arts or anything. Like, I feel like you have to be very adaptable. You're gonna, oh, you know what? Maybe it isn't like that. It humbles you. But what happened those conversations early and often was piss poor. You can kind of see it in their eyes, so you have to kind of set the tone. And just, and I would constantly ask for feedback too. Now, did it make everybody happy? No, there was always somebody that, I could be doing something better with my time. But unfortunately, they may carry that over into their next duty station or next job, and it's just going to hurt their unit. It's going to hurt the people around them. But some people got it, and I think they were better for it.
Yeah, it definitely takes either a special person or a special event in a person's life to really humble them. My wife always tells me whenever because like I'm pretty prideful, right? And sometimes my wife will tell me in my most prideful moments, she'll look over and go, "Sweetheart, would you like to humble yourself now, or do you want God to do it for you later?" And I'm always like, I would love to humble myself now, because when the big guy upstairs does it, it sucks. Like it's the worst feeling in the world. In fact, in the CHP Academy, I got a little taste of what military boot camp was like, because that's an actual live-in academy. You live there from Monday through Friday. As long as you don't mess up, you can go home on the weekends. And from day one, it was like drill sergeant screaming at you in your face. I mean, it's 27 weeks long. The first 3 weeks, their only goal is to make you quit. And I think in the first day I was there, I think we had 3 people just quit, like straight up. And this is something they waited for 2 years to even get to that point as a cadet. And I mean, I'm not gonna lie, there were times when I wanted to quit too. So I went off on a tangent there. I do that a lot. But circling back to what we were talking about before about humbling yourself, I think that's so key, especially if you strive to be in a leadership spot or a position later on. You have to learn how to follow, right? And I think a large part of what makes people like yourself, who are leaders in the military, what makes you guys great is it seems like you're constantly being taught to humble yourself, to crawl prior to walking, prior to running, prior to sprinting, and you have to retrain yourself every single time. Is that an accurate reflection of what the military is like?
It's what it should be. I will say stubborn, worse, honestly. Sometimes stubbornness wins. It just depends on the context. But something that I've always tried to keep in mind, and whether I'm trying to instill it on my troops or myself, is be teachable and be humble. And so if you slow take it's not like being flexible a lot better than if you're gonna like hard on a certain from decision making that occurred from stubbornness. And so it's either you're gonna learn that way, like someone's gonna tell you the stove's high, are you gonna touch it? Or but it's just you have to constantly remind yourself and be mindful of it. And it doesn't matter if you're in the military or outside. In certain jobs, there are certain things that have to be decisions that have to be made quickly. And in that sense, you still have to be mindful throughout that process, because if you don't, you could potentially make a mistake or not. I mean, it's just one of those risks, right? But it's something, I struggle with.
Uh-oh. Matt, can you hear me? You're frozen again. Uh-oh. Oh, there we go. I think I got you back. Yep, you're blinking. You're back. Sorry. You were saying the last thing I heard you say was
Okay,
struggle with.
I can hear you. Yeah, but it's a worthy struggle, and that's what I ended up with. Like, in so just being mindful that it's a process. I don't think it's really an end state. Like, I will get this and that it'll be all done with. No, it's something you just do, or you should be doing, in most steps.
Yeah, absolutely. So intelligence. So I've heard a lot of different things about the intelligence field and what that entails. Tell me a little bit more. Like, obviously, don't go into super detail because I know there's a lot of stuff you can't cover because of classified stuff. But tell me a little bit more about the intelligence field. What was it that attracted you to that, and what exactly is it for people that don't know?
Okay, so intelligence is an extremely broad umbrella term for a number of sub-disciplines within that. So, folks may have heard terms like HUMINT or SIGINT or NSA, things like that, whether it's from TV shows, movies, and stuff like that. But there's a number of different types of sub-disciplines. And honestly, I would just probably relate it to, think of like all the types of senses the human body relies on to gather information. And that's essentially what like the different types of disciplines attempt to collect. So for me, my specialty coming in at the time was called imagery intelligence, IMINT. It changed its wording to geospatial intelligence, but to really dumb it down, I basically tell people, the things that you see on Google Maps, satellite imagery from aircraft. But basically, that anything that gives you like a top-down view of something that has call-outs or any information added to it, that's what I would do. And that's what I did for over a decade. So that was my my piece of the pie that I owned and took care of. I did dabble in full motion video, so anything that was coming off of surveillance drones and things like that, I worked on a little bit. Not so much the still imagery, but I've done a number of those types of jobs. And then so now I'm an intelligence officer. So I can be in charge of any sub-discipline that I get assigned to. I have a little bit of knowledge in each of them. I'd probably say I would know the imagery side a little bit more because I have a little bit of background in it, but for the most part, I can get kind of plugged into an area and understand kind of what they're talking about, and then I would have to really, sit with the analysts and whatnot to really understand like what they're doing and how I can best advocate for them, support them, and whatnot, so they can take care of the mission.
Sure. And that probably translates well over to, let's say you get out of the military, you want to continue using that skill. Is there an opportunity for that with like military contracting?
Oh yeah, so that was another thing that kind of blew my mind when I joined, was the civilian and contract opportunities, imagery wise or otherwise. So as an intel officer, there's opportunities out there for sure, but even in those sub-disciplines like imagery, absolutely. But there's a number of them that are being used in the private sector too, so it's pretty versatile. I was very surprised and happy to learn about that. So I was like, cool, this is going to be pretty nice. Should I leave? Because there are opportunities out there. But I have a lot of friends who, did 4 years or 6 years, but they basically did their first obligation, and they deploy out like every so often with these certain companies, maybe for 6 months, maybe for a year. And I mean, they were making pretty good money. Obviously now they're deploying, so there's risks with that. There's, of course, especially if they have a family and whatnot. But if they're a single guy or gal deploying out and making money, I mean, that could be a good resume builder on its own, to maybe like roll into something else, maybe a little more stable as they kind of get older or tired of that grind.
For sure. And that's that's actually the reason I started my podcast, was because I wanted to talk to people like you specifically to help people to understand how to market themselves. And I think a large part of the population needs to know that enlisting in the military, especially with what discipline you choose when you come in or what discipline you've been given, you're going to be able to make the most of that as long as you don't have a dirty record in the military, no DUIs, no arrests, no dishonorable discharges. I mean, you're going to be able to make a lot of money because people with those skills are highly sought after. And really, I mean, if you wanted to get into like what you're saying, this is how much of a simpleton I am. like imagery, you can't just go to like an imagery school or take an imagery course in like a university and go, okay, I can now be contracted by the same company that's going to contract somebody like you, right? Because you've had decades of experience with it.
Yeah, so certain universities have certain programs, and it really just depends. Like there's like imagery scientists and stuff like that out there. There's folks that specialize in GIS. Was it geospatial information services? But basically, there's these programs out there that students can go to and basically become experts on and become marketable on these programs. So essentially, that's an avenue for folks who maybe they don't want to do the military thing, but they could still go that route. And a lot of people do. So what will happen is like maybe they'll get a background in that, or they maybe get a background in poli-sci. But then they'll apply for the 3-letter agency it's the equivalent to NSA. It's called the NGA. And so they'll go to that and that agency apply. And then if they get selected, they will send them to an imagery or like a DOD type school to basically get a baseline for that line of work. But there's different avenues, so it doesn't have to be somebody that just goes through like Air Force training. The Marines have an imagery school, the Navy has an imagery school, the Army has their own imagery school. So, a lot of these ints, you work joint with other services, which is actually pretty cool. When I went through, I was in a class full of like E5 Marines that yelled at us all the time. And we got taught by Marines that yelled at us all the time. And, that was just part of the fun. But our training was shared. It's pretty common for some of the other folks. Maybe they do SIGINT or HUMINT, especially the translators. They're all in one, under one roof. So it's pretty interesting in that regard, but it doesn't have to be military. There's civilian avenues to get to the same goal.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. But still, something like the civilian training is not going to be as adequate as something like a military training, right? Or is it about the same par?
So, well, like it depends. I don't know about so the NGA has their own like training program to get people like kind of spun up to a baseline. I don't know how that fares with the DoD's side of it. I will say the DoD has been doing it for a long time, so it's pretty tight in terms of like how they train and how well it is. And I would say like when I got out of there, I felt like, you can stick me at any assignment and I'm just going to go after it and, do it. But at the end of the day, all those schools are really designed to do is make you trainable. Like they're basically like outputting students that can now be trained regardless of like where they go. It's like when you get to that next position, you can speak the same language. You understand what folks are going to be talking about, what they're going to be teaching you. So you're just that much faster to adopt like whatever that unit is specifically tasked to do. So in that sense, I would say the end goal is probably is the same across the board, is just to get folks on the same, kind of like basic training, get people on the same level and then build them up.
Gotcha. That's interesting. I didn't know that part. So I have actually I have 3 questions for you. And if this is classified information, you can't tell me. Just let me know.
Okay.
Don't tell me, oh, for some reason my camera went off there. Let me go back. Hold on.
Okay.
See, this is what I keep telling my audience. I have a high production here, people. Super high production. I'm literally in my closet talking as I said that.
I didn't lose you. I still saw you.
Oh, good. Yeah, for some reason my camera was just like, oh, here's all the windows you have open. And I was like, oh no, can people see that? But apparently they can't. So that's good. So first question. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being super easy, 1 being extremely difficult, how easy is it to pick up chicks in that uniform?
I would probably say it depends on what neighborhood you're hanging out at, but and you know what kind of lady you're interested in. But I don't know. I mean, as soon as I started opening my mouth, like, you know, experience tells me, like, you know, it didn't matter if I was wearing a uniform or not. You know, I was awkward as hell, and so I mean, you know, it may pull some ladies in or whatever, but you know, for some folks, including me, as soon as I started talking, it was like, all right, bye.
Yeah. So it's really just like an icebreaker, right?
It can be. And so, yeah. And I will say, though, it really depends, though, on the town, because there's some towns that are military friendly, and then there's some neutral, and some it's like, yeah, you probably shouldn't be wearing your uniform like out. So it would just depend, you know.
Is that in the States you're talking about, where there's towns that just don't like you?
Uh, it can be. Like, so I didn't really necessarily experience it, even if I went to, like, so I was stationed in Ohio, Dayton, Ohio, for the majority of my time. I also was stationed in Texas. In Texas, very military friendly. I mean, it was not uncommon for folks to, like, if you went out to eat, they were like, they would pay for your lunch. Like, they were just very appreciative. And I was very appreciative when they did that. And they would never tell you who did it, so you couldn't thank them. So they were just gone after they would do it. In Ohio, it was weird because in some places you would get that, and then there's certain areas where they're just like very, like, what people would call, like, very classically, like, liberal places. I mean, there was one place in Yellow Springs. I mean, they'd hold protests a lot and things like that. Now, would they action off of any of that? Like, you were to walk down the street or, like, in a car, but it's more nuanced. It was definitely different depending on, like, what town you would be in. And I mean, I'm only speaking from Ohio.
Right.
I remember going to California, like, a couple of times, and neutral. Like, I mean, so what? You know, but I'd go home. I remember I went home to Massachusetts for called Recruiter Assistance Program. Classically liberal place, and I mean, I didn't get, like, spit on or anything like that, but it was, lived right near a very liberal college and things like that. They had protests all the time, but again, never actioned off. They do anything great. You know, it was just, but there was a little bit, you know, you could tell there was, like, maybe I didn't feel anything or another, but it's certainly there.
Yeah,
and going back to your first question, I would not try to pick up girls at that college. So.
Yeah, not sure if that's the kind of girl that you want. Is somebody that doesn't. Just my opinion. Don't comment, people on YouTube. Don't comment on my page and be like, forget you. You love military. I don't read comments. Period. Not that I've ever had one, but that's not the point. Anyways, second question. So, you were intelligence. You're in imagery. If you can't answer this question, that's okay. I think I already have my own theory on this. Are aliens real? People want to know, Matt. Are they real? Have you seen them?
Are they real? I have not. I have not. I'm
Don't
definitely interested
don't lie to me, Matt.
to know if they're
Don't
real.
lie. You
But
can tell me the truth.
no, I don't know. I don't know. I have no idea, man. But I do
Okay.
have a funny story.
Oh, I knew it.
So a couple times I had to go to a grocery store to pick up some things for work, and but during work, so I'd be in uniform, I'd grab a couple, cases of water, energy drinks, things like that, bring them back for the office. Being the fresh lieutenant, that was just part of the job, still is. And there's a guy that, and this is pretty common, but like at a Sam's Club or Costco, they would have these folks like posted up, like as you exit, like trying to sell you stuff, like home insurance or tires or whatever. And there's this one guy here in Colorado who and he stopped me twice. He forgot we talked before, but he asks me every time I walk by. He's like, "Hey, did you see that video that they just released? It's pretty convincing, right?" He's like, "So can you tell me what's going on with these aliens?" I'm like, "Dude, I have no idea, man. I even if I did, like, you think I could talk about it? No, but I can see
Oh,
that video
see.
is super interesting. It's not something it's not something I personally really uh pay much attention to, but yeah, well, I was like, he's to let him know, yeah, you're the first person I'm gonna tell.
Right. The guy hanging outside the grocery store, I'm gonna go up to him like, dude, you were totally right. Aliens are real. Look, I have proof. Here's from my general. He told me it's true. In fact, my general is in fact an alien. He was on that shit, bro. So there you go.
It's wild. It's
Yeah,
wild.
dude. Dude, it's crazy. Okay, last question for you, because I've been telling the story for I want to say the better part of 20 years now. I've been telling this story, and I think it was you that did this. I want to see if you remember this, because this was in, I want to say this was in Mrs. Underwood's class, but it is one of the funniest stories I ever tell to people. In fact, I told my daughter, who's 7 years old today, about the story, and she cracked up. She thought it was the funniest thing. I want to see if you remember this, because I remember you doing this very, very clearly. So, Mrs. Underwood, by the way, Mrs. Underwood, if you're listening, never mind the first part of this podcast. Just fast forward like 30 seconds. We're not talking about how great you looked. Um, but I remember Mrs. Underwood was teaching us about word comprehension, or not word comprehension, but comprehensive word problems, right? And the example was, and I'm going to get some of the details wrong, but the example was, she said, okay, so pay attention to the details. Okay, Johnny's dog has 2 bones, and immediately your hand shot up super fast. And she looked over and she went, yes, Matthew. And you went, what's Johnny's dog's name? And I was like, I started to laugh because I'm like, oh boy, this is going to be great. And she goes, Matt, it doesn't matter what Johnny's dog's name is. Okay, don't pay any attention to that. Johnny's dog doesn't have a name. And she turned around, she started again. Johnny's dog, and your hand shot up again. And she goes, Matthew, what's the deal? And you went, why would somebody have a dog, but they wouldn't name their dog? And you could tell she was just getting really frustrated by this. Like her face was like turning red, and she's like looking around at the rest of the class. The rest of the class, including myself, were starting to fall out laughing. I'm just sitting there going like this. And she goes, Matthew, stop asking questions. And she turned around, and you had the saddest look on your face. I think she picked up on that, because she turned around and she went, okay, look, Matthew, I'm so sorry. Johnny's dog's name is Fido. Okay. And you went, okay, thank you. And she turned around and you mumbled under your breath, but just loud enough for me to hear. And I think another person in class heard it. You went, that's a stupid name. But dude, I tell that story all the time because it's such a great story. So my question to you is, do you remember doing that?
No, a lot of times of delinquency in my younger years, is like a blur. Like there's times when, yeah, like you bring up that story, like I'm laughing because I'm like, I could totally see that happening, but I was like, I don't remember like actually doing it. But yeah, like I can't remember who I was talking to, but yeah, they brought something up from Dudley, like they're like, yeah, you did this. I'm like, I couldn't believe it. I was like, I did that. Like it sounded like somebody else did that, but yeah, I was a turd, man. Like I was a turd, like during the like for a lot of those years. But that's hilarious. Like I'm gonna share that with my wife. I think she'll
Yeah,
get a kick out of that. But
yeah, definitely. That's
yeah,
like,
that's man, that's hilarious.
yeah, dude, moments like that, because for me, I think it was, I mean, school to me is a blur. Like, I don't really remember a lot of it because by the time I was 13, I was already working. Like, I was teaching martial arts. I was making $7 an hour, so I thought I was like the king of the whole school. Like, I'd walk in, like some girl in line, like, oh, I need 25 cents more. I'm like, don't worry, girl, I got you. I'll buy your pretzel and cheese and Pepsi for $1.75. No problem. But like things like that, like stories like that of people being just hilarious, they stick with me. There was another story, because I know you know Spencer Hobbs, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So shout out to Spencer, by the way. Long time no talk. I know you're my friend on Facebook, but that doesn't mean we like know each other or anything. But I remember going to Redwood Alliance with him and being really intimidated that I was away from home because I was young. I wasn't used to that. And it was Spencer that really got me through that because he would just do the funniest stuff and he would just crack me up every single like every single night. So um like people that have a sense of humor, I think they honestly I think they're given that to make people like me feel better when they're younger because it relays such confidence and that everything's going to be okay. So anyways, that story has just always stuck with me. I thought that was hilarious. But yeah, so uh, that being said, I know you're on LinkedIn. So Matt, if somebody wanted to find you on LinkedIn, how do they find you?
Yeah, I mean, just Matthew Rainwater. There's not many of us out there, but just look for the guy with the goofy smile and Air Force affiliation, and you'll be able to find me. So
There you go.
that's pretty much it.
Absolutely. So, by the way, LinkedIn is not a sponsor of the podcast, but this is how much I value LinkedIn. As you know, Matt, like I make a whole bunch of crazy videos and posts and stuff. I'm super active on LinkedIn. And really what that's done, just to give LinkedIn a quick advertisement, what LinkedIn has done, what connecting with people on LinkedIn has done is obviously it brings people like Matt and myself into a position where we can talk to each other, we can have this platform, we can talk about how to market yourself, what kind of skill possibly enlisting in the military will give you, how to transition that skill into your private sector life. But if you're looking for a job, you're looking for a career, connect with people like Matt on LinkedIn because, guys, I'm telling you, if you're listening to this, you don't have a LinkedIn page, you are missing the boat. There was an article just written on LinkedIn that said resumes are dead. And I can tell you from my personal experience, I think that that's true, honestly, because a lot of stuff is now digital marketing. A lot of it's getting your name out there via social media. But lastly, for people that are canceling your Facebooks and you're going to LinkedIn, please don't treat LinkedIn like Facebook. Facebook is that way, guys. We don't care about your conspiracy theories, although they're funny. Okay, maybe send it to me in a private message. I'll listen to it. Anyways, that being said, go get LinkedIn, go connect with Matthew Rainwater. Guys, thank you so much for listening to Stop Interview Start Sign. I'm your host, Philip Meyer. Matt, thanks again for doing this, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Phil. Thanks for having me on.